Alrighty, what it do, what it do, what it do, what it do, what it do. Greetings, greetings, good evening, everyone. What's going on? This is Chief Kalinago Flying Eagle with another lesson, another episode. All right, the American Aborigines. All right, Aboriginal race. We're gonna dive a little deeper into that. Now, for you guys that's been following along, whether you have seen the live or you've caught the recording, in the past few lessons, I've just been breaking down again, diving deeper as to establishing not just opinions but facts, all right, from every perspective, scholarly perspective of who we are, you know what I mean? And I brought it down yesterday to showing that from another perspective, from a biblical perspective, that if we were to look at this from an Adam and Eve perspective, then we know who we are, all right? But once again, all of these are speculations, and I want you to know is the most puzzling piece of history is trying to figure out where did the Aborigines of the Americas came from. And trust me, family, when I tell you it's a mystery, it is. But again, it's not. Okay. And I'm going to tell you why. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to dive back into the Bible, because it didn't start with Adam and Eve. All right. And that's what I'm going to break down this evening. So with that being said, if you guys are ready, let me know that you're ready. Type some 8s in the chat. You know what I mean? First off, I want to acknowledge the great spirit, universal intelligence, the great I am, what people call God. And also I'm going to check the energy on that word God and the great spirit, because I use great spirit, but I'm going to check the energy on this God character, and I'll let you guys know what I came up with. But anyway, definitely want to honor my ancestors, just thanking them for guiding and protecting me each and every day, man. It's a beautiful thing. While I was in a state of rest earlier, or just so you guys know, right? After I did the live last night, when I was done, I took like an hour break, and I didn't go. Literally, I laid down about 6:30. I stayed up all night reading. All right. So once again, I want y'all to know that I'm dedicated to this. That's what I do. I love doing this, and that's why I do what I do. You feel me? I was up all night, literally. Okay. So, but I got some rest during the day, so I'm okay. All right. So, I'm thankful. So let's get into this. And like I said, this is going a little deeper. And, if you look at every prehistoric book, all right, it's always a puzzle as to who the American Aborigines are. All right. They're always speculations. Okay. But the truth is, people do know the truth. They just don't want us to know the truth. And my goal, my job is to bring that information out. You do what you want with it. I'm only here to give you the facts. All right. So I'm going to go into the Bible. Then we're going to do some reading. Okay. It's not a lot of reading. This book has about 48 pages, and it's also on the website. Pardon me. All right. Let me drink a little bit of water. It's also on the website. Okay. But the first thing we're going to do first is we're going to go into Genesis, and we're going to break down a few things down. Okay. So let's do this. And I want to shout out everyone that's on the live right now. Okay, let me see. Where do I have that scripture at? I know. Let me see. Okay, right here. All right, good. We got that. Okay. All right, so here we go. We don't have to start all the way in Genesis chapter 1. Okay, I mean, we're going to start in chapter 1, but we're not going to start from verse 1. So for those of you who don't know, okay, there are actually a few creations in the Bible. All right, now, by no means I'm saying the Bible is the ultimate truth. All I'm just saying is from that perspective, from a religious perspective, when it comes to, the Bible, I'm also using that as a point of reference, along with scientific evidence, geological evidence, archaeological evidence, ethnological evidence. I mean, every way, shape, or form, I am proving who we are. Okay, so let us get into the Bible. So Adam and Eve, yes, it was the creation it was another creation. But before Adam and Eve, there were more other creations in Genesis 1. So Genesis 1, creation of man, did not start with Adam and Eve. Okay, just so y'all know. So what we're looking at here right now is, let us look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, where Actually, let's start with 26. It's 26, pardon me. All right. And God said, all right, now, right now, we are not going to do the semantics about who God is, what God is. That's not what this is about. Okay, we'll get into that another time. All right, which I will save for later. But we're just going to strictly what the book is saying. All right, that's what we are going to deal with right now. So, and God said, let us here is plural. All right, so that's alluding to more than one entity or more than one God. Most people say, well, it's the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Well, the ghost had to be somebody, okay? So the point is they left out the woman. So it's actually, the man, the mother, and child, okay? So that's what, to me, in my opinion, the Trinity is, all right? But anyway, it says, let us make man in our own image, after our likeness, okay? If a dog has a dog and the dog made a dog in its likeness and image, therefore the dog will look like its parents, all right? So if this God or entity made man, okay, in their likeness and image, because it's plural, all right, then it's safe to say that the creation will look like that God, okay? And it's only safe to say that, all right? Now, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. In 27. So the God in the Bible created man in his own image. Now, in this case, man here, all right, means both genders, all right? Both the feminine and the masculine energy was used to create him and her, all right? So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. Okay, so right off the rip, in chapter one, there was a creation. All right, now it gets a little more interesting. In 28, and the God said, bless them. And God said unto them, be fruitful. Okay, that's number one. In other words, you have to produce fruits. All right. And since you are not trees, it's safe to say that they're talking about children. Do what I did. Okay, create after your kind and likeness, and multiply. So even if you're gonna just don't have children, have them multiply. And what? Replenish. Key word, replenish the earth. Now, anytime you have to, the word replenish means to do over. And anytime you put re in front, any word, re as a prefix, it means that it was done before. So even before that creation right there were creations before that creation. So as a matter of fact, there were creations before Genesis chapter 1. Okay, because that had to be replenished. And subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. Okay, so that's a key word right there. To replenish means that to do it over. Okay, do it over. Now let me break that down to you. In the first few verses of Genesis, when God was creating, okay, God created light, God created the trees, the water, and it was all good. Now, this is conductive reasoning, all right? For God to know it's all good, God has to know it's all bad, okay? Because the only way to experience good, you have to have good to compare something with, okay? So what am I saying? I'm saying that the God in the Bible, or the God of creation, is not perfect. The God in the God of creation is perfect but imperfect in creation. Why? Because to know if something is good, you have to have something to compare it with. All right? It's common sense. Think for yourself. Now, just imagine if you only had one arm in the middle of your chest. How would you know what's left or right? If there was only up and no down, how could you compare it? If there was no in and no out, how can you compare that? So in order for God to know what's good, God had to experience what's bad. So from trying and trying and trying, then God finally figured it out and say, wow, man, I'm a little tired today, but it's all good. Okay? It's all good. So God was making an attempt to create until, okay, it became a creation that was satisfactory. Now starting to look in the likeness and image of that God and said, wow, it's all good. Do me a favor. Go ahead and replenish the earth. Fill it up again because we messed up a few times. Okay? And just so you know, when they're speaking of that God, okay, it's really intelligence. I tell people God is not energy. Okay, God, intelligence moves through energy, but it's all intelligence. And within intelligence, there is creation, every characteristics of even thought. Okay, and that's why the Bible say what? Go back to being a child. Okay, now look at the characteristics of a child. The Bible didn't say be childish, but go back to being a child. Now, if you take a child, okay, if you take a child, I'm going to show you who was there before Adam and Eve. If you take a child and you put a child in a playroom, and that's why they put children in kindergarten and they have big baskets of toys and different Legos and all that, right? Prove me wrong. Take a child, put them in a room and give them a big basket of building blocks. What is that child going to do? That child, they're going to take the blocks and they're going to create something and build, okay? And they're going to break it apart, put it together until they create something that they feel comfortable with, and in their own mind, it's all good. Well, that is the nature of God, for those of you who don't know, or the essence of what we call God, okay? So let's keep that in mind, all right? So it came to a point where through the trial and failure, okay, God ended up saying, well, you know what? Wow, that's more like it. All right, so I'm gonna rock with that. Do me a favor, guys. Go ahead, have dominion, subdue the earth. Let's do this again. All right. Now let's go to 29 and read that here for a second, because a lot of people don't know what meat is. And I'm going to break down to you what meat is. Okay. All right. Number 29, or verse 29 rather. And God said, behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be meat. Well, let us break that down first. So God was saying in the very beginning that you are not supposed to eat GMO fruits without seed. Okay, that are the only set of fruits that we were supposed to eat. I'm talking about the first, not the first creation or the first perfected creation, so to speak. Okay, it was only seeds with fruits. All right. Why is God making that statement? Because God knew there was going to come a point where GMO would come around. All right. Now, meat. A lot of people think meat is flesh. Flesh and meat are two different things. Meat became flesh in the 1300s as a definition. So what we're going to do now, we're going to take some time and we're going to look at the etymology of the word meat, the foundation and the meaning of the word meat. Okay, let's do that. Oh, and while I'm doing that, I want to give a shout out to Elliot. Thank you so much, man, for supporting the Cash App. It means a lot. It really, really means a lot when people show their appreciation like that. All right. Not that I don't appreciate everybody else, but they see the hard work and, you know, the time that I'm putting in. And that meant a lot. So thank you very much. I just wanted to give you a shout out. So let us look at the etymology of the word meat here for a second. Okay. Because everybody's talking, oh, I want meat on my plate. Now, y'all don't want meat on your plate. You want flesh on your plate. There's a difference. All right. So let us look at the etymology of meat. Okay. Meat, noun, Middle English met, from Old English met, food, nourishment, sustenance. Okay. Paired with drink, item of food, animal food, fodder, all meal, repast. Okay. Basically food, moist, wet, also with reference to food qualities. Okay. However, in the 13th century, it was attested to what? Flesh. It was attested to flesh. But nowhere in the Bible or in the first etymology of the word, meat dealt with flesh. Whatever animals eat, their food was considered meat, which is plants. So plant is meat. Okay. Animal flesh is not meat. All right, just so y'all know, because the first set of fulfilled or satisfied creation based on the God in the Bible, he, she, they told them that you're only supposed to eat plants, no flesh. All right, no flesh. It's only when Adam was created. And remember, I taught y'all that Adam meant Adam and Eve. And God didn't name Adam. It was Adam that named Eve. I mean, God didn't name Eve. It was Adam that named Eve. Okay? It was only until those creation were created. Why? Because they were in that way, they were a kind of man, so to speak. Okay? So you had man in the beginning and you had a kind of man. And that kind of man was a spiritually, how would I put it? Spiritually challenged man. In other words, a man that was capable of sinning. That was created in Genesis chapter 2. All right. And because of that, in his diet, so to speak, he was told that he could eat meat. All right. Meaning that animals, the lowest form of your lowest self. All right. You could eat that. All right. And that's also in Genesis chapter 2. All right. Now let's go back here for a second. I'm not going to go back to Genesis. I'm going to go now to the book. Okay. And I'm going to show you who are the people that was in chapter 1. The people that sprung from the ground before Adam and Eve. And then Chief Kalinago is going to put 2 and 2 together and we'll take it from there. And you'll really know who is who. Okay. All right. Let's read. And that book is on the site. Okay. I just don't like to give people information and, say, oh, well, this is what I say now. I'm giving you the reference. Okay. It's there to read for yourself. Okay. So like I told you before, I have a lot of information in my arsenal. All right. This is another one, but everything has to be done. All right. Based on how my spirit is instructing me to do it. Okay. So the distinctive characteristics of the Aboriginal race of America. Okay. By Samuel George Morton, MD, author of Crania Americana, Crania Egyptiana and Company. All right. Second edition that was published in 1844. Okay. 1844. Let's read the notes. Notes. Let's make it big so everybody could see, right? All right. Note to the second edition. The following essay was read at the annual meeting of Boston Society of Natural History on the 27th of April, 1842, and published by direction of the society. All right. So this book, this edition was read, this essay was read out loud, okay, at the Boston Society of Natural History. So it's not a secret. Okay, it's not a secret. We have to realize that there's a reason why all this type of books, they're kept away from the public. And trust me, I have a whole lot more. Okay. In the present edition, I have made a few verbal corrections and I added some collateral facts in an appendix. I have taken a rapid glance at what I conceive to be a peculiar traits of the Aboriginal race of America, as embraced in 5 principal considerations: their organic, moral, and intellectual characters, their mode of intimate, and their maritime enterprise. And from these, I have ventured to draw a few definite conclusions. I am aware that it may appear presumptuous to attempt to a wide a range within the brief limits of the present occasion, especially as some points can be touched only in the most general manner. But my object has been to dwell rather upon some of these which have hereto received less attention than they obviously deserve, and which are intimately involved in the present inquiry. And that's by S.G. Morton, Philadelphia, July 1st, 1844. Okay. Absolutely. You're absolutely welcome. We got to go back to what it was. You know what I mean? We have to go back to plants, all right, because that's meat. All right. We are not the fallen man. Okay. So, but anyway, let me not jump jump the gun. All right. So let's read. Like I said, reading is fun for the mental. I love to read. That's what I do. Okay. Now, ethnography, the analyst and clarification of the races of men, is essentially modern science. At a time when nature in her other departments have been investigated with an equal zeal and success, this alone remained comparatively neglected. And of the various authors who have attempted in exposition during the past and present centuries, too many have been content with closet theories in which facts are perverted to sustain some baseless conjecture. Hence, it has been aptly remarked that Asia is the country of fables, Africa of monsters, and America of systems to those who prefer hypothesis to truth. The intellectual genius of antiquity justly excites our admiration and homage, but in vain we search its records for the physical traits of some of the most celebrated nations of the past time. It is even yet gravely disputed whether the ancient Egyptians belonged to the Canaanite, to the Caucasian race or to the Negro, and was it not for the light which now dawns upon us from their monuments and their tombs, these questions might remain forever undecided. Just so y'all know. Okay, and that's just a side note. Some people may or may not agree with it, but Egyptians were both from the Caucasian race and the Negro race. Just so y'all know, because the Canaanites also lived in Egypt as well. All right, and that's facts. All right, just so you guys know. The present age, however, is marked by a noble zeal of these inquiries, which are daily making man more conversant with the organic structure, the mental character, and the national affinities of the various and widely scattered tribes of the human family. Among these, the Aboriginal inhabitants of America claim our special attention. Like I said before, the American Aborigines are the most studied race on the planet. Why? Because they have no idea where we came from. A lot of it is speculation, but a lot of people do know the truth. And that's why we are diving so deep, so that I could bring the truth to you. All right? Keep that in mind. This vast theater has been frowned from immemorial time by numberless tribes which live only to destroy and be destroyed without leaving a trace. Without leaving a trace of their sojourn on the face of the earth. Contrasted with these were a few civilized communities whose monuments awaken our surprise without unfolding their history. And he would unravel their mysteries, may be compared in the language of poets to a man standing by the stream of time and striving to rescue from its waters the wrecked and shattered fragments which float onward to oblivion. And I've always said our story is a mystery. Okay, only us could uncover our story. All right. It is not my present intention even to enumerate the many theories which have been advanced in reference to the origin of the American nations, although I may, in the sequel, inquire whether their genealogy can be traced to the Polynesians or the Mongolians, the Hindus, the Jews, or the Egyptians. Nor shall I attempt to analyze the views of certain philosophers who imagine that they have found not only a variety of races, but several species of men among the Aborigines of this continent. It is chiefly my intention to produce a few of the more strikingly characteristic traits of these people to sustain the position that all the American nations, excepting the Eskimo, are of one race, and that this race is peculiar and distinct from all others. So every book that I'm bringing to you, all right, that's prehistoric America, all right, they are consistent, all right, and they are saying that except for the Eskimos, all the children of the Americas, all right, they are distinct from all other races, and they have seemed to come from one stock. All right. Okay. Number one, physical characteristics. It is an adage among travelers that he who has been one tribe of Indians has seen them all. So much do the individuals of this race resemble each other, notwithstanding their immense geographical distribution and those differences of climate which embrace the extremes of heat and cold. So let me just kind of, break that down, what they're saying in simpler terms. All right. They're saying that with the physical characteristics, once you have seen one Indian tribe, it doesn't matter where it's at in the Americas, you've seen one, you have seen all, because they resemble each other. And notwithstanding the geographical, differences, whether it's hot or cold, you might have some that's a little lighter, but darker, but they all resemble in each other in regards to the physical body, the physiognomy, and their characteristics. And indeed, that again is a fact. Okay. Half-clad, Fuegian striking from his dreary winter, was the same characteristic lineaments, though in exaggerated degree, as the Indians of the tropical plains, and these again resemble the tribes which inhabit the region west of the Rocky Mountains, those of the Great Valley of Mississippi, and those again with skirt, the Eskimo on the north. All possesses alike the long, lank black hair, the brown or cinnamon colored skin, the heavy brow, the dull and sleepy eye, the full and compressed lips, and the salient but dilated nose. Now that word dilated is very, very important. All right. Now, once again, let us go. Okay. Let us go and read this again. Okay, let's read this again. All possesses alike long, lank, black hair, the brown or cinnamon colored skin. Once again, cinnamon is not pale. Cinnamon is brown, copper colored complexion. So I'm talking to the natives again. How can you be the original people of the Americas? Because you are not brown skin. And no disrespect, I'm just pointing it out. Okay. Let us read some more. It says, the dull, sleepy eyes, the full and compressed lips, and the salient but dilated nose. That's a very key word, dilated, because what coherence does it have to a nose? Well, let's go look at the definition of dilated, because I keep telling my people, you have to read with understanding. All right. Don't read to finish, but read to comprehend. All right. Let us look at when you have dilated pupils. What does that mean? So let's look at the definition of dilated. All right. Dilated meaning. Just so y'all know. Okay. Let us look at the meaning of the word dilated. Okay? Dilated. I love this, man. I love this. Dilated. All right? Dilated. What does it say here? And let us hear the pronunciation of the word.
Dilate.
Oh, well, it's not dilate, it's dilate. Okay, dilate. Okay. My bad on the pronunciation. Dilate, right? It says, make or become wider, larger or more open. Look at the synonyms. Enlarge, widen, expand. Okay? So once again, the Aboriginals of America were brown skin, okay, with nostrils, okay, that are pretty much wide. Okay? And again, of course, a lot of it depends on the part of the Americas that you were in. All right? So don't be ashamed if you have your wide nose. Okay, doesn't mean that you're not an Aborigine. You feel me? Because people think, oh, well, because you're dark skin and your nose might have a little flare, all of a sudden you're African. You see, that's ignorance. Because They taught you that. That's what they taught you. You feel me? So dilated means what? Enlarge, widen. Okay? That's a true aborigine. Just so y'all know. Let us stop sharing that and let's keep on reading, because reading is fun for the mental. Let me go back and share. So I love my dilated nose, by the way. It's beautiful. Let's read. Okay. Now, all possesses alike the long, lank, black hair, the brown or cinnamon colored skin, the heavy brow, and the dull and sleepy eye, the full and compressed lips, and the salient but dilated nose. All right, family. Love who you are, family. Love who you are. Okay? Because we came in all shapes and sizes. All right. These traits, moreover, are equally common to the savage and the civilized nations, whether they inhabit the margins of the rivers and feed on fish, or rove the forest and subsist on the spoils of the chase. It cannot be questioned that the physical diversities do occur, equally singular and inexplicable as seen in different shades of what color, varying from a fair tint, which is the red bone, to a complexion almost black. Here we go again. There's a difference between somebody that's pale and somebody that's a red bone. Okay? There's a difference between somebody that's pale, fair skin, pale, and somebody that's a red bone, which is fair skin. All right? That is the range of the Aboriginal copper-colored races. And these two under circumstances in which climate can have little or no influence. So also in reference to the stature, the difference are remarkable to in entire tribes, which, moreover, are geographically proximate to each other. These facts, however, are mere exceptions to a general rule and do not alter the peculiar physiognomy, meaning that the face of the Indian, which is a undeviantly characteristics as that of the Negro. So once again, why would they be comparing these so-called natives to Negroes? You see, y'all got to wake up. Y'all got to pay attention. That's why I tell you, and when I, and I have to keep banging on the natives because they know the truth. You feel me? And they're living a lie. And every tongue, like I said, every tongue will confess and every knee will bow because it's our time. And we're stepping up and we're not gonna yield. We're not doing that. Okay? We coming like a Mack truck on a highway without speed limits. All right? Just so y'all know. Let's read this again. Which is undeviantly characteristic as that of the Negro. For whether we see him in the athletic Sharib, which is a Carib, okay, now, or the stunned Shamar in the dark Californian, or the fair Bora, he is an Indian still and cannot be mistaken for a being of any other race. Just so you know, the majority of all the tribes in California were dark skinned. Okay? All of them. Just so you know, the majority of them were dark skinned. Over 80% of the tribes in California were dark skinned. So they say, regardless of what, no matter where you see an Indian, whether it's a Sharib from the islands or here in the mainland, they are still an Indian still and cannot be mistaken for any other race. All right? The same conformity of organization is not less obvious in the osteological structure of these people, as seen in the squared or round-headed, the flattened or vertical occiput, the high cheekbones, the ponderous maxillae, the large quadrangular orbits, and the low receding forehead. I have had opportunity to compare nearly 400 crania derived from the tribes inhabiting almost every region of both Americas and have been astonished to find how the preceding characters in greater or less degree pervade them all. And like I said, there was only two Americas, okay? It was only south, and north until they created the Central America. All right, just only south and north. This remark is equally applicable to the ancient and modern nations of our continent. For the oldest skulls from the Peruvian cemeteries to the tombs of Mexico and the mounds of our own country are of the same type as the heads of the most savage existing tribes. Over 400 craniums from all over the Americas, and they all have the same proportion and characteristics. Okay? Their physical organization proves the origin of one to have been equally the origin of all. The various civilized nations are to this day represented by their lineal descendants who inhabit their ancestral seats and differ in no exterior respect from the wild and uncultivated Indians. At the same time, in evidence of their lineage, Clavigero and other historians inform us that the Mexicans and Peruvians yet possess a latent mental superiority which has not been subdued by 3 centuries of this despotism. And again, with respect to the royal personages and other privileged classes, there is undoubtedly evidence that they were of the same native stock and presented no distinctive attributes excepting those of the social or political character. The observations of Molina and Humboldt are sometimes quoted in disproof of this pervading uniformity of physical characteristics. Molina says that the difference between an inhabitant of Chile and Peruvian is not less than between an Italian and a German, to which Humboldt adds that the American race contains nations whose features differ as essentially from one another as those of the Circassians, Moors, and Persians. Okay, so you see, they're saying that we are the features that we have is different from the Circassians, the Moors, and the Persians. So to confirm, we are not Moors. All right, that we could kill and leave that alone. We don't even have to go into that no more. All right, but all these people are of one same race and readily recognized as much, notwithstanding their differences of feature and complexion, and American nations present a precisely parallel case. So what they're saying is the Circassians, the Moors, and the Persians, they're all one race, okay, notwithstanding the slight difference in composition. So it is safe to assume that the American nations of presently have the same parallel case. Okay, I just want to make sure that that quote is understood. All right. I was at one time inclined to the opinion that the ancient Peruvians were inhabited by the islands and confines by Lake Titicaca, presented a congenital form of the head entirely different from that which characterizes the great American race. Nor could I at first bring myself to believe that their wonderfully narrow and elongated crania resulted solely from artificial compression applied to the rounded head of the Indian. Hold on for a second. Give me 1 second. 1 second. That such, however, is the fact has been indisputably proved by the recent investigations of M.D. Aubigny. This distinguished naturalist passed many months on the able land of the Andes, which embraces the region of this extraordinary people, and examined the desiccated remains of hundreds of individuals in the tombs where they have lain for centuries. M. Aubigny remarked that while many of the heads were deformed in the manner to which we have adverted, others differed in nothing from the unusual conformation. It was also observed that the flattened skull were uniformly those of men, while those of the women remained unaltered, and again that the most elongated heads were preserved in the largest and finest tombs, showing that this cranial deformity was a mark of distinction. But to do any with any remaining doubt on this subject, Aubigny ascertained that the descendants of these ancient Peruvians yet inhabit the land of their ancestors and bear the name of Aymaras, which may have been their primitive designation. And lastly, the modern Amaras resemble the common Quechua of Peruvian Indians in everything that relates physical conformation, not even excepting the head, which, however, they have caused to mold artificially. Submitted to the same anatomical test, the reputed giant and dwarf races of America proved to be mere inventions of ignorance or imposition. A careful inspection of the remains of both has fully satisfied me that the asserted gigantic form of some nations has been a hasty influence on the part of unpracticed observers, while the so-called pygmies of the Valley of Mississippi were mere children who, for reasons not wholly understood, were buried apart from the adult people of their tribe. Because I remember a lot of people, especially a particular group, they were trying to prove that the pygmies are the original people of the Americas. I'm like, y'all got to be crazy, okay? But this is being explained in this book as well, all right? Thus, it is that the American Indian, from the southern extremity of the continent to the northern limit of this range, is the same exterior man. With somewhat variable stature and complexion, his distinctive features, though variously modified, are never effaced, and he stands isolated from the rest of mankind, identified at a glance in every locality and under every variety of circumstances, and even his desiccated remains, which have withstood the destroying hand of time, preserve the primeval type of his race, excepting only when art has interposed to pervert it. All right, you hear that? The American Indian, from literally all that have passed, whether they have been buried or some that are still alive, all right, they have preserved the way that they look. And the only way, all right, that it was misrepresented, and I'm breaking that down in layman's term, it was misrepresented, or it wasn't given credence, or it wasn't given its true depiction, or it was only when it was interposed on what they call perversion. And some examples of that is what? The images that you see, the movies, all that's perversion, all right? So that you will not know who the true Aborigines are, okay? Number two, moral traits. These are perhaps as strongly marked as the physical characteristics of which we have just spoken, but they have been so often the subject of analysis as to claim only a passing notice on the present occasion. Among the most prominent of this series of mental operations is a sleepless caution and untiring vigilance which presides over every action and masks every motive. The Indian says nothing and does nothing without its influence. It enables him to deceive others without being himself suspected. It causes that proverbial tacitunity, I think that's how it's pronounced, I apologize for butchering that word, among the strangers, which changes to qualify among the people of his own tribe. And this is the basis of that invisible firmness, which teaches him to contend unpenitently with every adverse circumstance and even with death in the most hideous forms. All right. The love of war is so general, so characteristic that it scarcely calls for a comment or an illustration. One nation is almost perpetual hostility with another, tribe against tribe, man against man, and with this ruling passion are linked and merciless revenge and an unsparing destructiveness. So let me just break that down, okay? They're saying that the American Indians, the Aboriginals, all right, we have a warlike nature in general, okay? And it was shown, you know, when tribes were going against tribe, man was going against man, and it literally brought some type of destruction, okay? And that's where divide and conquer came in, because tribes were rivaling with other tribes, and we still have it today. All right, a lot of our people, we still fight each other, so it's nothing new under the sun, right? The Chickasaws have been known to make a stealthy march of 600 miles from their own hunting grounds for the sole purpose of destroying an encampment of their enemies. The small island of Nantucket, which contains but a few square miles of barren sand, was inhabited at an advent of European colonies by two Indian tribes who sometimes engage in hot and deadly feud with each other. All right, now you know why it was easy for us to be infiltrated, because in the time of war, a lot of us didn't forget our beefs. Okay, we didn't. Some of us came together, but a lot of us did not come together, and we chose sides to go against each other. All right, but what is yet more remarkable, the miserable natives of Terra del Fuego, whose common privations have linked them for a time in peace and fellowship, between suddenly excited by the same inherent ferocity and exert their puny efforts for mutual destruction. Of the destructive propensity of the Indians, which has long become a proverb, it is almost unnecessary to speak. But we may advert to a forcible example from the narrative of the traveler Hearn, who accompanied a trading party of northern Indians on a long journey, during which he declares that they killed every living creature that came within their reach, nor could they even pass a bird nest without slaying the young or destroying the eggs. Man, that's brutal. That philosophic traveler, Dr. von Martius, gives a graphic view of the present state of the natural and civil rights among the American Aborigines. Their subdivision, he remarks, into an almost countless multitude of greater, smaller groups, and their entire exclusion and excommunication with regard to each other strike the eye of the observer like fragments of a vast ruin, to which the history of other nations of the earth furnishes no analogy. This disruption of all the bands by which society was accidentally held together, accompanied by a Babylonianish confusion of tongues, the rude rite of force, the never-ending tacit warfare of all against all, springing from that very disrupture, appear to be most essential, and as far as history is concerned, the most significant points in the civil condition of the Aboriginal population of America. So yes, we were warring against each other, all right? It may be said that these features of the Indian character are common to all mankind in the savage state. This is generally true, but in the American race, they exist in a degree in which will fairly challenge a comparison with similar traits in any existing people, and if we consider also a habitual indolence and improvidence, their indifference to private property, and vague simplicity of their religious observance, which for the most part are devout of spacious aid of idolatry. We must admit them to possess a peculiar and eccentric moral constitution. If we turn now to the demi-civilized nations, we find the dawn of refinement coupled with those barbarous usage which characterized the Indian in his savage state. We see the Mexicans, like the later Romans, encouraging the most bloody and cruel rites, and these too in the same of religion, in order to inculcate hatred of their enemies, familiarity with danger, and contempt of death. And the moral effect of this system is manifest in their valorous, though unsuccessful, resistance to the Spanish conquerors. Among the Peruvians, however, the case was different. The inhabitants had been subjugated to the Incas by combined moral and physical influence. The Inca family were looked upon as being of divine origin. They assumed to be messengers of the heaven, bearing rewards for the good and punishment for the disobedient, conjoined with the arts of peace and various social institutions. History bears ample testimony that those spacious pretenses were employed first to captivate the fancy and then to enslave the man. The fairly adage that knowledge is power was well understood by them as by us. Learning was artful, restricted to privileged class, and the genius of a few soon controlled the energies of the many. Nothing new under the sun. All right. Even in our societies, in certain societies, it was the have against the have-nots. So it was easy to infiltrate. All right. Divide and conquer. And then the genius of a few soon controlled the energies of many. Thus, the policy of the Incas inculcated in their subjects an object obedience which knew no limit. They endeavored to eradicate the feeling of individuality, or in other words, to unite the minds of the Puebloan multitude in a common will, which was that of their masters. Thus, when Pizarro made his first attack on the defenseless Peruvians in the presence of the Inca, the latter was born in a throne on the shoulders of 4 men, and were told by Herrera that while the Spaniards spared the sovereign, they aimed their deadly blows at his bearers, who, however, never struck from their sacred trust. For when one of their number fell, another immediately took his place, and his historian declares that if the whole day had been spent in killing them, others would still have came forward to passive support of their master. In fact, what has been called the paternal government of the Incas was strictly such, for their subjects were children who neither thought nor acted except at the dictation of another. Thus, it was that people whose moral impulses are known to have differed in little or nothing from those of the barbarous tribes, who reduced partly by persuasion, partly by force, to a state of effeminate vassalage, not unlike that of the modern Hindus. Like the latter, hold on for 1 second, please. Like the latter too, they made good soldiers in their native wars, not from any principle of valor, but from the sentiment of passive obedience to their superiors, and hence, when they saw their monarch bound and imprisoned by the Spaniards, their conventional courage at once forsook them, and we behold the singular spectacle of an entire nation prostrated at a blow, like a strong man whose energies yield to a seemingly trivial but rankling wound. After the Inca power was destroyed, however, the dominant spirit of the people again arose in all the moral vehemence of their race, and the gentle and unoffending Peruvian became transformed into the wily and merciless savage. Everyone is familiar with the sequel. Resistance was too late to be availing, and the fetters to which they had confidently submitted were soon refeated forever. As we have already observed, the Incas depressed the moral energies of their subjects in order to secure their own power. This they effected by inculcating the arts of peace, prohibiting human sacrifices, and in a great measure avoiding capital punishment, and blood was seldom spilt, excepting on the subjugation of warlike and refractory tribes. In these instances, however, the native ferocity of their race broke forth even in the bosom of the Incas, who we are told by Garcilaso, the defendant and the apologist of the Peruvian kings, that some of their wars were absolutely exterminating. And among other examples, he mentions that of the Inca Yupanqui against the province of the Coloa, in which whole districts were so completely depopulated that they had subsequently been colonized from other parts of the empire. And in other instances, the same unsparing despot destroyed 20,000 Caracunquis or Caranquis, pardon me for butchering that word, whose bodies he ordered to be thrown into an adjacent lake, which yet bears the name of the Sea of Blood. In like manner, when Atahualpa contested the dominion with Cusca, he caused the latter together with 30 of his brothers, to be put to death in cold blood, that nothing might impede his progress to the throne. We have thus endeavored to shew that the same moral traits characterize all the aboriginal nations of this continent, from the humanized Peruvian to the rudest savage of the Brazilian forest. Number 3, intellectual faculties. It has often been remarked that the intellectual faculties are distributed with surprising equality among individuals of the same race who have been similarly educated and subjected to the same moral and other influences. Yet even among these, as the physical man, we see that the strong and the weak, with numberless intermediate graduations, this equality is infinitely more obvious in savage than in civilized communities, simply because in the former the condition of life is more equal, whence it happens that, in contrast to a single mastermind, the plebeian multitude are content to live and die in their primitive ignorance and inferiority. This truth is obvious at every step of present investigation, for the numberless herds which have inhabited the American continent, a fractional portion only has left only a trace of refinement. I venture here to repeat my mature conviction that as a race, they are decidedly inferior to the Mongolian stock. They are not only adverse to the restraints of education, but seem for the most part incapable of continued process of reasoning on abstract subjects. Their minds seize with avidity on simple truths, while they reject whatever requires investigation or analysis. Their proximity for more than 2 centuries to European communities has scarcely affected an unappreciable change in their manner of life, and as to their social condition, they are probably in the most respects the same as it were in the primitive epoch of their existence. They have made no improvement in the construction of their dwellings, except when directed by the Europeans, who have become domiciliated among them for the Indian cabin or the Indian tent, from Terra del Fuego to the River St. Lawrence, in perhaps the humblest contrivance, even devised by man to screen himself from the elements. Nor is it their mechanical ingenuity more conspicuous in the construction of their boats, for these, as I shall endeavor to show in the sequel, have rarely been improved beyond the first rude conception. The imitative faculty of a very humble grade, nor have they a predilection for the arts of sciences. The long annals of misery, labor, and private benefaction prevent few exceptions to the cheerless picture which sustained by testimony of nearly all practiced observers. Even in those instances in which the Indians have received the benefits of education and remained for years in civilized society, they lose little or none of the innate love of their national usages, which they almost invariably resume when left to choose for themselves. Such is the intellectual poverty of the barbarous tribes, but contrasted with these, like an oasis in the desert, are the demi-civilized nations of the New World, a people whose attainments in the arts and sciences are riddled in the history of human mind. The Peruvians in the south, Mexico's in the north, and the Muiscas of Bogota between the two formed these contemporary centers of civilization, each independent of the other and each equally skirted by wild and savage hordes. The mind dwells with surprise and admiration on their cyclopean structures, which often rival of Egypt in magnitude, on their temples, which embrace almost every principle in architecture except in the arch alone, and on their statutes and bas beliefs, which, notwithstanding some conventional imperfections, are far above the rudimentary state of arts. I have elsewhere ventured to designate these demi-civilized nations by the collective name of the Toltecan family, for although the Mexican annals date their civilization form period long and antecedent to appearance of the Toltecas, yet the latter seem to have cultivated the arts and sciences to a degree unknown to their predecessors. Besides the various nations which at different times invaded and possessed themselves of Mexico, were characterized by the same fundamental language and the same physical traits, together with a strong analogy in their social institutions. And as the appearance of the Indians in Peru was nearly simultaneously with dispersion of the Toltecas in the year 1050 of our era, is reasonable ground for the conjecture that the Mexicans and the Peruvians were branches of the same Toltecan stock. We have alluded to a civilization antecedent to the appearance of the Incas and which had already passed away when they assumed the government of the country. There are traditional and monumental evidence of this fact, which can leave no doubt on the mind, although of its date we can form no just conception. It may have even preceded the Christian era, nor do we know of any positive reasons to the contrary. Chronology may be called to the crutch of history, but with all its imperfections, it would be invaluable here, where no clue remains to unravel these mysterious records which incite our research but constantly elude our security, or scrutiny rather. Hold on for a second. All right. We may be permitted, however, to repeat what is all important to the present inquiry, that these ancient Peruvians were the progenitors of the existing Amora tribes of Peru, while these last are identified in every particular with the people of the great Inca race. All the monuments in which various nations have left behind them over a space of 3,000 miles go also to prove a common origin, because notwithstanding some minor differences, certain leading features pervade and characterize them all. Whether the hive of civilized nations was, as some suppose, in the fabled region of Aslan in the north, or whether, as the learned Cabrera has endeavored to shew, their native seats were the Chippewas and the Guatemala, we may not stop to inquire, but to them, and to them alone, the race monolithic gateways of Peru, the sculptures of Bogota, the ruined temples and pyramids of Mexico, and the mounds and fortifications of the valley of Mississippi. Such was the Toltecan family, and it will now be inquired how it happens that so great a disparity should have existed in an intellectual character of the American nations, if they are all derived from a common stock, or other worlds belong to the same race. How are we to reconcile the civilization of the one with the barbarism of another? It is this question which has so much puzzled the philosophers of the past 3 centuries and led them, in the face of facts, to insist on a plurality of the races. We grant the seeming anomaly, but, however, much is opposed to general rule. It is not without ample analogies among the people of the old world. No stronger example need to adduced than that which presents itself in the great Arabian family, for the Saracens who established their kingdom in Spain, whose history is replete with romance and refinement, whose colleagues were the centers of genius and learning for several centuries, and whose arts and sciences have been blended with those ever subsequent ages. These very Saracens belong not only to the same race, but to the same family with the Bedouins of the desert, those intraceable barbarians who scorn all the restraints which are not imposed by their own chief, and whose immemorable laws forbid them to sow corn, to plant fruits trees, or to build houses, in order that nothing may conflict with those roving and predatory habits which have continued unaltered through the period of 3,000 years. Other examples, perhaps not less forcible, might be adduced in the families of the Mongolian race, but without extending the comparison or attempting to investigate this singular intellectual disparity, we shall, for the present at least, content ourselves with the facts as we find them. It is important, however, to remark that these civilized states do not stand isolated from their barbarous neighbors. On the contrary, they merge gradually into each other, so that some nations are with difficulty classed with either division and rather form an intermediate link between the two. Such are the Araucanians, whose language and customs and even whose arts prove their direct affiliation with the Peruvians, although they far surpass the latter in sagacity and courage, at the same time that their social institutions present many of features of intractable barbarism. So also the Aztec rulers of Mexico at period of the Spanish invasion exhibit with their bloody sacrifices and the multiform idolatry a strong contrast to the gentler spirit of the Toltecas who preceded them and whose arts and ingenuity they had usurped. Still later in this intermediate series were the Natchez tribes of Mississippi, who retained some traces of refinement of their Mexican progenitors, mingled with many of the rudest traits of the savage life. So they are saying that the Natchez of what was that, Mississippi, all right, the progenitors of them were the original Mexicans. It is thus that we can yet trace all the gradations, like link by link, which connect these extremes together, showing that although the civilizations of these nations is fast becoming obsolete, although their arts and sciences have passed away with a former generation, still the people remain in all other respects unchanged, although a variety of causes have long been urging them onward to deep degradation and rapid extinction. All right, so they're saying that even if the culture is gone, you know, the knowledge for the most part, the people still remain. All right, just wanted to kind of clarify that. Strange as these intellectual revolutions may seem, we venture to assert that, all circumstances being considered, they are not greater than those which have taken place between the ancient and the modern Greeks. If we had incontestable evidence to prove the fact, we would believe that the ancestors of the Greeks of the present day were the very people who gave glory to the age of Pericles. It may still be insisted that the religion and the arts of the American nations point to Asia and Egypt, but it is obvious, as Humboldt and others have remarked, that these resemblances may have arisen from similar wants and impulses acting on nations in many respects similarly circumstanced. It would indeed be not only singular, but wonderful and unaccountable, observes Dr. Caldwell, if tribes and nations of men possessed of similar attributes of mind and body, residing in similar climates and situations, influenced by similar states of society, and obliged to support themselves by similar means in similar pursuits, it would form a problem altogether inexplicable of nations thus situated did not contract habits and usages and instinctively modes of life and action, possessing towards each other many striking resemblances. Here also we may draw an illustration from the old world, for notwithstanding the comparative proximity of the Hindus and the Egyptians and the evident analogies in their architecture, mythology, and social institutions, there is now no reason to believe them cognate nations and the resemblances to which we have adverted have probably risen from the mutual intercourse independent of lineage affiliation. And so with nations of the America, the casual appearance of shipwrecked strangers would satisfactorily explain any sameness in the arts and usages of one and the other, as well as those words which are often quoted in evidence of a common origin of language, but which are so few in number as to readily accounted for on the foregoing principle. The entire number of common words is common to be 104 between the American languages and those of Asia and Australia, 43 with those of Europe, and 40 with those of Africa, making a total of 187 words. But taking into account the mere coincidence by which some of these analogies may be reasonably explained, I would inquire in the language of an ingenious author whether these facts are sufficient to prove a connection between 400 dialects of America and the various languages of the old world. Even so late as the year 1833, a Japanese junk was wrecked on the northwest coast of America, and several of the crew escaped unhurt to the shore. And I have myself seen some porcelain vessels which were shaved on that occasion. Such casualties may have occurred in the early periods of the American history, and it requires no effort of imagination to conceive the influence these persons might have exerted in various respects had they been introduced to the ancient courts of Peru and Mexico. They might have contributed something to extend or at least to modify the arts and sciences of the people among whom they were thrown, and have added a few words to the national language. I am informed by my friend Mr. Townsend, who passed several months among the tribes of the Columbia River, that the Indians have already adopted from the Canadian traders several French words which they use with as much freedom as if they belonged to their own vocabulary. It follows, of course, from the preceding remarks that we consider the American race to present the two extremes of intellectual character, the one capable of certain degree of civilization and refinement independent of extraneous aids, and the other exhibiting an abasement which puts all mental culture at defiance. The one composed, as it were, of a handful of people whose superiority and consequent acquisitions have made them the prey of covetous destroyers, the other a vast multitude of savages, tribes whose very barbarism is working for destruction from within and without. The links that connect them partake of the fate of the extremes themselves, and extinction appears to be unhappy but fast approaching doom of them all. Number 4, Maritime Enterprise. One of the most characteristic traits of all civilized and many barbarous communities is the progress of maritime adventure. The Caucasian nations of every age present a striking illustration of this fact. Their sails are spread on every ocean, and the fabled voyage of the Argonauts is but a type of their achievement from remote antiquity to the present time. Hence, their undisputed dominion of the sea and their successful colonization of every quarter of the globe. The Mongolians and Malays, though active and predatory and proverbially aquatic in their habits, are deficient in mechanical invention, which depends on knowledge of mathematical principles, while they seem also incapable of those mental combinations which are a requisite to a perfect acquaintance with naval tactics. The Negro, whose observant and imitative powers enable him to acquire with ease the details of seamanship, readily becomes a mariner, but rarely a commander. And history is silent on the nautical prowess of his race. Far behind all these is the man of America, savage or civilized. The sea for him has had few charms, and his navigation has been almost exclusively restricted to lakes and rivers. A canoe excavated from a single log was the principal vessel in use in the New World at the period of its discovery. Even in the predatory Caribs, or the Caribs, who were originally derived from the forests of Guyana, possessed no other boat than this simple contrivance, in which he seldom ventured out of sight of land, and never excepting in tranquil periods of tropical seas, when they sailed from shore to shore, the terror of the fabled natives of the surrounding islands. Canoes of the Arawaks of Cuba were not more ingeniously contrived than those of the ruder Caribs, which is the more surprising since the island was the center of a great archipelago, and their local possession, therefore, in all respects calculated to develop any latent nautical propensities. When Cortez approached in his ships the Mexican harbor of Tabasco, he was astonished to find even there the seaport, as it were, of a mighty empire, the same primitive model in the many vessels that schemed the sea before him. Let us follow this conqueror to the imperial city itself, surrounded by lakes and possessed of warlike defenses superior to those of any other American people. The Spanish commander, foreseeing that to possess the lake would be to hold the keys of the city, had 15 brigantines built at La Scala, and then being subsequently taken to pieces, were bone of men, shoulders to the Lake of Mexico, and they're reconstructed and launched. The war thus commenced as a naval contest, and the Spanish historians, while the eulogies that valor of the Mexicans, are constrained to admit the utter futility of the aquatic defenses. For although the subjects of Montezuma, knowing and anticipating the nature of the attack, came forth from the city in several thousand boats, these were so feeble constructed and managed with so little dexterity that in a few hours they were all destroyed, dispersed, or taken by the enemy. Turning from the Mexicans, we can naturally look at the Peruvians for some further advances in nautical skill. But although their country was comparatively a narrow strip of land with an extended frontier on the ocean, we find even here the same primitive vessels and the same timid navigators. It is indeed questionable whether they ever designedly lost sight of land, nor does it appear that they made the sea subservient to their conquests. These were uniformly persecuted by land, excepting perhaps those of the Incas in their efforts to subdue the fierce islanders of the Titicaca. But when the partial pen of Garcilaso limits all these inventions to log canoes and rafts of the reefs, nor does it appear that the ingenuity of these people, so abundantly displayed on many other occasions, had ever added an improvement to the primeval gem of navigation. Nor are those tribes which depend almost wholly on fish for their daily sustenance much better provided than the others. The Chinooks and other nations on the western coast of America have boats hewn with comparative ingenuity from a single plank and compared to a butchery tray, but it is these frail vessels they keep cautiously within sight of land and never venture on the water unless the weather is favorable to their enterprise. It is to be observed, however, that when the Indians are compelled to carry their boats across portages from river to river, they construct them of birch bark and with a degree of ingenuity and adaptation much above their usual resources. Thus, boats that would carry 9 men, do not weigh over 60 pounds, and are therefore conveyed with ease to considerable distances. This is almost the only deviation from the log canoe, and is equally characteristic, for it is common among the interior Indians of both North and South America, and was noticed by Dr. Solis in Mexico or Mexican provinces. Inferior in these aspects, the other tribes are Fuegians, a people whose perpetual exposure and privation and influence of the inhospitable climate have reduced to a feeble intelligence the moral childhood of their race. Not even the stimulus of necessity has been able to excite that ingenuity which would so amply provide for all their wants, and they starve amid the abundant shores of the ocean because they possess no adequate means for obtaining them. The Falkland and Moulin Islands in but 50 degrees of the south latitude, south of Georgia, New South Shiftland, and some smaller islands in nearly the same parallel were at their discovery entirely uninhabited, nor is there any evidence of their ever having been visited by any American tribe. Yet they possess seals and other marine animals in vast numbers, and in those and all other respects appear to be not less productive than the region inhabited by the Eskimos, pardon me. It is generally supposed that nautical enterprise results from the necessity of the case. In nations proximate to or surrounded by the sea, we have seen, however, that the natives of the islands of the Gulf of Mexico were the exceptions to the rules, and we find another not less remarkable in the archipelago of Shiloh on the coast of Chile. These islanders are seen from the shore and have a large Indian population which depends for sustenance on fish taken from the surrounding ocean. Yet even so late as the close of the past century, after more than 200 years of communication with the Spaniards, their boats appeared not to have been least improved from their original model. I know it's taking us a little time to get to the juicy parts, family, but let's just, go through this little, introductory phases, all right? The Padre Gonzalez de Agarros, who resided many years among these islanders, describes their canoes as composed of 5 or 6 boards, narrowed at the ends and latched together with cords that seems being filled with mousse or moss. They have sails, but neither keel nor deck. And in these frail and primitive vessels, the inhabitants commit themselves to a tempestuous sea in search of their daily food. The same miserable vessels are found in the exclusive use in the yet more southern archipelago of Goa, Texas, in which the sparse population is distributed over 800 islands and depends solely on the sea for sustenance. The mechanical ingenuity of these people, therefore, is not greater than that of the other Indians, but from constant practice with their wretched boats, they have acquired a dexterity in use of them unknown to any other tribe, and in some instances, under the direction of the Spaniards, have become comparatively good mariners. De Azara mentions a curious fact in illustration of the present inquiry. He declares that when this countrymen discovered the Rio de la Plata, they found its shores inhabited by 2 distinct Indian nations, the Chihuahuas on the north and the Patagonians on the south. Yet strange to say, these restless people had never communicated with each other for war or for peace, for good or for evil, because they had neither boats or canoes in which to cross the river. The Indian is not defective in courage even on the water, but he lacks invention to construct better vessels and tact to manage them. When he has been compelled to define himself in his frail canoe, he has done so with the inaudible spirit of his race. Yet all his love of war and stratagem, I cannot find any account of a naval combat in which Europeans have borne no part. The Payaguas Indians at one period took revenge on the Spaniards by infesting the rivers of Paraguay in canoes, with which they managed with much adroitness, and darting with their lurking places, they intercepted the trading vessels going to from Buenos Aires, robbing them of their goods and destroying their crews without mercy. Such was their success in these rivers piracies that is required years of war and stratagem on part of the Spaniards to subdue them. The only example of a naval contest that I have met with is described by Dobry Hofer to have taken place between the so-called Mamelukes of St. Paulo in Brazil and the enemies of Guaranis. The former were a banditti derived from the intermarriage of the trades of Europeans of all nations with the surrounding Indians, and assisted by 2,000 of their natives allies, they came forth to battle in 300 boats. The Guaranis, on the other hand, had 5 ships armed with cannon. But this is obvious from the statement the European vessels and the European tactics gave the battle all its importance. It took place on the river Boro in Paraguay. But after all, both parties, finding themselves out of their element on the water, at length abandoned their vessels by mutual agreement and fought to desperation on the shore. It is said that the inhabitants of the New Holland, that their only substitute for a boat is a short and solid log on which they place themselves astride and thus venture upon the water. Even this, the humblest of all the human contrivances, was in use among the Indians of the Bay of Honduras, who had learned to balance themselves on seriously standing upon a log to be able in this position to pursue their customary occupation of fishing in an adjacent sea. In fine, this long contact with European arts has furnished the Indian with no additional means of contending with the watery elements, and his log, canoe, and boat of birch bark are precisely the same as the landing of Columbus. All right, let me drink a little water and slow down a little bit. Number 5, manners of intimate. Veneration of the dead is a sentiment natural to the man, or to man, whether civilized or savage, but the manner of expressing it and performing the rites of culture differ widely in different nations. No offense excites greater exasperation in the breast of the Indian than the violation of the graves of his people, and he has even been known to decenter the bone of his ancestors and bear them with him to a great distance when circumstances have compelled him to make a permanent change of residence. But the manner of inhumation is so different from that practiced by the rest of mankind, and at the same time so prevalent among the Indian nations as to constitute another means of identifying them as parts of the single and peculiar race. The practice consists in burying the dead in the sitting posture, the legs being flexed against the abdomen, the arms also bent, and the chin supported on the palms of the hands. The natives of Patagonia, Brazil, and Guyana, the Insular and the other Caribs, the Florida tribes, and the great chain of Lenape nations, the inhabitants of both sides of the Rocky Mountains, and those of, also of Canada and the vast Northwest region, all conform with the occasional exception to this conventional rite. Okay, basically, when they buried the dead, they buried them in a sitting position with their palms on their knees or whatever. I don't know why they did that, but that was just some type of rite. Okay, and it was practiced among a lot of those tribes. So also with the demi-civilized communities from the most distant epos, for ancient Peruvians, to whom have already so frequently referred, possessed this singular usage as it verified by their numberless remains in the sepulchres of Titicaca. They did not, however, bury their dead, but placed them on the floors of their tombs, seated and shoed up in stacks. The later Peruvians of the Inca race followed the same custom, sometimes inhuming the body, at other places in a tower above the ground. Garcilaso del Vega informs us that in the year 1560, he saw 5 embalmed bodies of the royal family, all of whom were seated in an Indian manner, with their hands crossed upon the breast and their heads bent forward. So also the Mexicans of the most ancient time had adopted the same usage, which was equally the privilege of the king and his people. The most remarkable exception to the practice in question is that in which the body is dissected before interment, the bones also being deposited in the earth. This extraordinary rites or rite has prevailed among various tribes from the southern to the northern extremity of their range. In Patagonia, Brazil, Florida, and Missouri, and indeed in many intervening localities. But even in these instances, the bones are often retained in their relative position by preserving the ligaments and then entered in the attitude of a person seated. An example among many others is recorded by the Baron Humboldt, in which in his visit to a carven cemetery of the Otros Indians at the sources of the Orinoco. Within, he found hundreds of skeletons preserved, each in a separate basket, and bones being held together by their natural connections, and the whole disposed in a conventional posture of which we are speaking. I am all aware that this practice has been noticed by some navigators among the Polynesian islands. The instances, however, appear so few as rather to form exceptions to the rule, like those of the Nasamones of the northern Africa. But I have sought for it in vain among the continental Asiatics, who, if they ever possessed it, would have yet preserved it among some, at least, of their numberless tribes. After this rapid view of the principal leading characteristics of the American race, let us now briefly inquire whether they denote an exotic origin, or whether there is not internal evidence that this race is as strictly aboriginal to America as the Mongolian is to Asia or the Negro is to Africa. And first, we turn to the Mongolian race, which by somewhat general consent is admitted to include the popular nations, and among these the Eskimo of our continent. It is a very prevalent opinion that the latter people, who obviously belong to the polar family of Asia, pass insensibly into the American race, and thus form the connecting link between the two. But without repeating what has been already said in reference to the Indian, we may briefly advert, for the purpose of comparison, to the widely different characteristics of the Eskimos. These people are remarkable for a large and rather elongated head, which is low in front and projecting behind. The great width and flatness of the face is noted by all travelers. Their eyes are small and black, the mouth small and round, and the nose is so diminutive and depressed that on looking at a skull, in its profile, the nasal bones are hardly visible. Their complexion, moreover, is comparatively fair, and there is a tendency throughout life to fullness and obscenity. The traveler Hearn, while in company with a tribe of northern Indians, mentions a circumstance which is at least curious because it shows the light in which the Eskimo are regarded by their proximate neighbors on the south. He was unwilling witness. He was the unwilling witness of a premeditated and unprovoked massacre of an entire encampment of Eskimo men, women, and children. And it is curious to remark that the aggressors apologized for their cruelty not only on the plea of the ancient feud, but by asserting that their offending victims were a people of different nature and origin from themselves, even in respect to sexual conformation. The moral character of the Eskimo differs from that of the Indian, chiefly in absence of the courage, cunning, cruelty, and improvidence so habitual in the red man, who in turn is inferior in the mechanical ingenuity, above all in aquatic exercises. The Eskimo, notwithstanding the intense cold of his climate, has been called an amphibious animal. Too readily and equally does he adapt himself to the land or water. His boat is an evidence of mechanical skill, and the adroit manner in which he manages is a proverb among mariners. The women are not less expert and enterprising than the men. Each possess a boat of peculiar and distinctive construction, and Krantz informs us that the children of the tender age of 7 or 8 years commenced the unassisted management of their own little vessels. How strongly do these and other traits, which might be enumerated, contrast with those of the Indian and enforce an ethnographic dissimilarity which is confined at very step of the investigation? Some writers, however, think they detect in the Fuegian a being whose similar physical condition has produced him all characteristics of the Eskimo, but we confidently assert that the latter is vastly superior, but in the exterior organization and mental aptitude. In truth, the two may readily contrasted, but not easily compared. The Fuegian bears a coarse but striking resemblance to the race to which he belongs, and every feature of his character assists in fixing his identity. The extremes of the cold, with their many attending privations by beautifying the features and distorting the expression of the face, reduced man to mere caricature, a repulsive prevention of his original type. Compare the Mongolians of Central Asia and China with the popular notions of Siberia. Compare also the Hottentot with the continuous black tribes on the north, the Tasmanian Negro with the proper New Hollander, and lastly the wretched fusion with the Indian beyond the Magellantic Strait. And we find it every instant how much more the man of the cold, inhospitably clime, is degraded physically and intellectually than his more fortunate but affiliated neighbor. The operation of this perverting causes through successive ages of time has obscured but not obliterated those lineaments which, however, modified point to the aboriginal stock. Without attempting to enter fathomless depths of philosophy, I am bound to advert to the opinion of Mr. Guillotin that all the nations from Cape Horn to the Arctic Ocean have languages which possess a distinct character in common to all, and apparently differing from those of the other continent, which we are acquainted. An analogy, moreover, is not of an infinite kind, but consists of the most part in peculiar conjectural modes of modifying the verbs by the insertion of syllables. It has been insisted by some writers that this analogy proves the cognate relation of Eskimos and Indians. This, however, is a mere postulate forth from the evidence already adduced in respect to the ethnographic differences between these people, we have a right to infer that the resemblance in their respective languages has not been derived by the greater from the lesser source, but by the Americans from the Eskimo, but the reverse for the Asiatics have arrived at various and distant periods and in small parties would naturally, if not unavoidably, adapt more or less of the languages of the people among whom they settled, until their own dialects finally merge in those of the Chippewayan and other Indians who bound them on the south. The Eskimos may be remarked at the present time extend much further south and are much more numerous on the western than on the eastern coast of America, being found as low down as Mount St. Elias, south of which, contrary to what is observed on the opposite side of the continent, they become more or less blended with the Indian tribes and have imparted to the latter some portion of their mechanical ingenuity. The difference in the extent and influence of the Western and Eastern Eskimo is explained by the proximity of their former to Asia, and redundant population has even forced some of them back to the parent hive, whether they have carried a dialect that derived from the cognate tribes of America, such are the Suchi, who thus form a link between the polar nations of the two continents. It is common opinion also that America has been peopled by the proper Mongols of Central and Eastern Asia, and volumes have been written on supposed affinities, physical, moral, and intellectual, to sustain this hypothesis. We have already glanced at the Mongolian features as seen, though rudely and extravagantly developed, in the polar nations, but there are some characteristics or some characters so prevalent as to pervade all the ramifications of the great Mongolian stock, from the repulsive Kalmuk to the polished and more delicately featured Chinese. These are the small, depressed, and seemingly broken nose, the oblique portion of the eye, which is drawn up at the external angle, the great width between the cheekbones, which are not only high but expanded laterally, the arched and linear eyebrow, and hastily the complexion, which is invariably some shade of yellow or olive, and almost equally distant from the fair tint of the European and the red hue of the Indian. Without attempting a detailed comparison, we may briefly observe that the Mongolian, in his various localities, is distinguished for his imitative powers and mechanical ingenuity, and for a certain degree of nocturnal skill, in which, as we have suggested, he holds a place next to the nations of the Caucasian race. In fine, we are constrained to believe that there is no more resemblance between the Indian and the Mongolian in respect to arts, architecture, mental features, and social usages than exists between any other two distinct races of the mankind. Mr. Rankin has written an elaborate treatise to prove that the Mongols, led by a descendant of Genghis Khan, conquered Peru and Mexico in the 13th century. But in the whole range of English literature, there cannot be found a work more replete with distorted facts and illogical reasoning. The author begins by a singular assertion that when Cosgo was founded by the Manco Capac, none of the civilizations introduced by the Peruvians and Mexico was in existence, thus overlooking the cultivated tribes who preceded the Inca family, and disregarding also the various demi-civilized nations which successively followed each other in Mexico before the country fell under the rule of the Aztecs. Mr. Rankin introduces not even expecting elephants, and in order that the Tatar general may correspond to the Mango Copac, he is made to enter Peru by the lake of Titicaca, upwards of the 100 miles from the sea. Such statements may seem too absurd for sober discussion, but they are not more so than various other subterfuges which have been resorted in explanation of the precise manner in which the New World have been peopled from the old. So basically what they're saying is this, right? They have books. I read one where the Mongolians came to America in the 13th century, but this author is saying that there is no substantial evidence of that, because the stories that they're telling in the book, a lot of those things wasn't happening in those places at that time. Okay, so but anyway, I'm just letting you know what they're saying, right? But there is not a shadow of evidence that the Mongols ever reached America in ships excepting by mere accident, and therefore their number must have always been too small and too badly provided to have dreamt of conquest in a country which has had a population of millions from immemorial time. Okay, so to go on the idea that Mongolians invaded the Americas, he's saying that it is impossible for that to happen. All right, so I'm just saying. There's a third view of this question which remains to be noticed, for allowing that the Eskimo and the cognate polar nations are not the progenitors of the American race, and admitting also that the Mongols of Central Asia would never have arrived in any requisite number by a direct voyage from the continent to the other. Yet it is supposed by many learned men that these Mongols could have reached America by slow journeys from their own distant country, and that their hieroglyphic charts delineate many of the incidents of this protracted migration, but there is no positive evidence in regard to the direction and localities, although these, by a very general consent, are placed in the north and northwest. Cabrera, on the contrary, after the most patient research, aided by unusual facilities in the investigation, traces the primal seat of civilization nations of America to southern Mexico, where the ruined cities of Copan, Oxmill, and Palenque point to the epoch seemingly much more remote than any antiquities contained in or near the present metropolis of that country. If we conventionally adopt the more prevalent opinion and trace the Aztec back to California or the Strait, we have after all but a vague tradition of a handful of persons who, for all we know to the contrary, may have been an indigenous to America as any people in it. The Aborigines of this country have always been of nomadic and migratory habits, a fact which is amply illustrated in the traditional history of Mexico itself. So also with the barbarous tribes, for the Lenape, the Florida Indians, the Iroquois, the insular Caribs, and many others were intruding nations who, driven by want or impelled by any innate and restless activity, had deserted their own possessions to seize upon others which they did not belong to them, or which did not belong to them. These nations, like their more polished neighbors, were in constant practice of recording the events of their battles and hunting excursions by hieroglyphic symbols made according to circumstances on trees, skins, or rocks. And this rude but expressive language of signs has been justly regarded as the origin of the picture writing of the Mexicans. The difference between them, observed Dr. Quartz, does not appear greater than most necessarily exists between the ignorant warriors and hunters in the simple form of society and these of the members of a complicated state, possessed of property and even, as described by Clavegerio, of a species of science and literature. The graduation of the ruder into the more perfect art of hieroglyph writing not only affords an additional argument for the unity of the origin of the American nations, but also constitutes another proof of the distinctiveness of their race. For this picture writing even in its most elaborate forms, bears no other than the most general resemblance to any exotic hieroglyphs, nor indeed has a real equivalent been detected between them. We may therefore be permitted to repeat our conviction that the annals of the Mexicans bear no indispensable evidence of immigration from Asia, but on the other hand, that they are susceptible of as many different interpretations as there are theories to be supported. It is remarked by Dr. Kovacs that the Mongolian theory, which we are now considering, is objectionable on an account of its vastness. Open quote. To derive the population of the whole of the American continent from the northwestern angle requires the supposition of a continued chain of colonies during a long succession of ages, acquiring and using an immense diversity of languages and pursuing each other along the huge ridge of the great American Andes, from Prince William Sound in the far north to the extremity of the Terra del Fuego, a distance of 115 degrees of latitude or of 8,000 miles. This long succession of occurrences is absolutely necessary to the theory, which is thus liable to the difficulty of requiring two extensive hypotheses at once. Several hundred colonies must be imagined to have issued from the same point, all completely isolated, as long as their languages abundantly show, unconnected by peaceful intercourse, but using each other by war and the destruction of the game throughout a third part of the circumstances of the globe. The traces of such a series of human waves would be naturally looked for in a tendency to advance population in the north, from which they emanated, and where the pressure must have been greatest and colonization longest duration. Nothing like this is observed. The population of the South America and the Darien, Guatemala, and Mexico being much greater in proportion than that of any other country further north. The marks of early civilization too, and one of the most important proofs of long residence in a fixed spot, are all, as in the elder world, in favor of the tropical climates. We may further inquire how it happens that during the lapse of more than 300 years since the discovery of America, there has not been an authenticated emigration from Asia. The long and desolating wars which have driven whole nations from the central to the northern parts of the continent have not supplied a single colony of the New World. Nay, if such colonization have occurred within 1,000 or 2 years, would we not now possess more undoubtedly evidence of it in a language, custom, and the arts? We propose in the next place to make a very few observations in reference to the idea that America has been peopled by the Malay race, which in ordinary classification it includes the Malays proper of the Indian archipelago. Let me see if I can pronounce that word. Archipelago, there we go, and the Polynesians in all their numberless localities. These peoples, however, have so much of the Mongolian character that nearly the same objections arise to both. The head of the Malaya proper is more like that of the Indian because it is not unfrequently presents something of the vertical form of the occiput and transverse diameter as measured between the parietal bone is also remarkably large. But excepting these respects, the osteological development coincides with that of the Mongolian. While the category of objections which we have just urged against the latter people is equally valid in respect to the whole Malay race. For independently of differences of organization, how great is the disparity in their arts and social institutions? So great indeed that to account for Dr. Lane, one of the most ingenious supporters of the theory insist on an intellectual degeneracy consequent to change of the climate and circumstances. Quote, open quote, "It is an easy and natural process," says he, "for a man degenerate in the scale of civilization as the Asiatics have eventually done in traveling to the northward and eastward. He has also to move forward in a few hundred miles into the wilderness and settle himself at a distance from all civilized men, and the process will advance with almost incredible clarity. For whether he comes in contact with the savages or not, in the darkness recesses of the forest, his offsprings will speedily arrive at the state of complete barbarism." Close quote. We confess our difficulty in imagining how the Polynesians themselves are barbarous people, though possessing some of the attributes of the civilized life, should become savages in the tropical regions of the America, wherein the climate must be as congenial to their constitutions as their own, and the various other external circumstances are calculated to foster rather than to depress the energies of naturally active and intelligent people. But the general prevalence of easterly winds is adverse to the colonization of America from the islands of the Pacific, for the nearest of these islands is 1,008 miles from the American coast. And when we reflect on the many difficulties which the mere distance opposes to navigation in small vessels, and the absolute necessity for food, water, and long period of time, we feel compelled to believe that America has received very feeble assertions to its population from the Polynesian islands. Such voyages, if admitted, could only have been accidental, for it is not to be supposed that these islanders would have attempted remote discoveries on the vast Pacific Ocean in the very face of the trade winds, and successful issue is among the least probable of human events. Even admitting that the Polynesians have accomplished all that theory requires, how does it happen that on reaching the continent of America, they should all at once have relinquished their intuitive fondness for the water, forgotten the construction of their boats, and become the most timid and helpful navigators in the world? A comparison of languages, moreover, gives no support to the Polynesian hypothesis, for all the zeal and ingenuity which have been devoted to this inquiry have tended only to disclose a complete physiological disparity. The theories to which we have thus briefly adverted would each derive the whole American population from a single source, but various others have been hazarded from a much more complex nature, by which the Indian nations are referred to a plurality of races, not even excepting the Caucasian. For example, the Peruvians, Moicas, and Mexicans are by some advocates of this system supposed to be Malays or Polynesians, while all the savage tribes are referred to as Mongolians, whence the civilization of one and the barbarism of the other. But we insist that the origin of these great diversions must have been the same, because all their ethnographic characters, not excepting the construction of their numberless languages, go to enforce an identity of race. Another doctrine which has had many disciples, among whom was the late Lord Kingsborough, author of Mexican Antiquities, teaches that the whole American population descended from the Jews. And we have heard that a lot, like, we are the lost tribes of Israel, right? Through the 10 lost tribes which were carried away by Zalmanazar, king of the Assyria. Here again, the differences of physical organization should set this question at rest forever. But independently of these, can we suppose that a people so tenacious as the Jews of their literature, language, and religion would not have preserved a solidarity unequivocal memorial of either among the multitude tribes of this continent, if any affiliation had ever existed between them. In short, we coincide in opinion with a fictitious author who sums up all the evidence of the case with the conclusion that the Jewish theory cannot be true for the simple reason that it is impossible. We feel assured that the same objective bears not less strongly on every other hypothesis which deduces any portion of the American nations from the Caucasian source. In order to solve the problem of the origin of the monuments of America, independently of any agency of Aboriginal race, an opinion has been advanced that they are the work of a branch of great Cyclopean family of the Old World, known by the various designations of the shepherd kings of Egypt, the Anakim of Syria, the Oskins of Etruria, and the Palestinians of Greece. These wandering Masons, as they are also called, are supposed to have passed from Asia into America at a very early epoch of history, and to have built those more ancient monuments which are attributed to the Toltecan nation. This view supported it is by some striking resemblances, and especially in architectural decoration, leaves various important difficulties entirely unexplained. It is necessarily presupposes a great influx of foreigners to account for such numerous and gigantic remains of human ingenuity and effort, at the same time that no trace of this exotic family can be detected in the existing Indian population. They and their arts are equally eradicated, and we can at most only conceive of the presence of these migratory strangers in small and isolated groups, which might have modified the arts of an antecedent civilization, while they themselves were too few in number to transmit their lineaments to any Aboriginal community. Closely allied to this theory is that our ingenious countryman, Mr. Delafield, who derives the demi-civilized nations of America from the Cushites, who built the monuments of Egypt and Industan, which is the original name for India. It supposes them to have traversed Asia to reach the Bering Strait and thus to have entered America at Northwest Eagle, whence they made their way by slow journeys to the central regions of the continent. Our objections to this theory will be found in what has been already stated, and we have merely add that the route by which the author conducts his pilgrim adventures appears to constitute the less plausible portion of history. Mr. Delafield supposes the barbarous tribes to be of different stock and refers them to the Mongolians of Asia, thus adopting the idea of plurality of the races. We shall lastly notice an imaginative classification which separates the Aborigines from America into the species of men exclusive of the Eskimos. This curious but unphilosophical hypothesis has been advanced by Mr. Bory de Saint Vincent, a French naturalist of distinction, who considers the civilized nations to be cognate with the Malays and designate them by the collective name of the Neptunian species, while to his three remaining species, the Colombian, the American, and the Patagonian, he assigns certain vague geographical limits without establishing any distinctive characteristics of the people themselves. The system is so devout a foundation in nature, so fanciful in all its details, as hardly to merit a serious analysis, and we have introduced it on the present occasion to illustrate the extravagance and poverty of the hypothesis in which have been resorted in explanation of the problem before us. Once for all, I repeat, My conviction that the study of the physical conformation alone excludes every branch of Caucasian race from any obvious participation in the peopling of this continent. If the Egyptians, Hindus, Phoenicians, or Gauls have ever by accident or design planted colonies in the America, these must have been sooner or later dispersed and lost in the waves of a vast indigenous population. Such we know to have been the fact with the Northmen, whose repeated though very partial settlements in the present New England states from the 10th to the 13th centuries are now matter of history. Yet, in the country, hold on for a second, in the country itself, they have not left a single indisputable trace of their sojourn. In fine, our own conclusion long ago deducted from a patient examination of all the facts, thus briefly and inadequately stated, is that the American race is essentially separate and peculiar, whether we regard it in its physical, its moral, or in its intellectual relations. To us, there are no direct or obvious links between the people of the old world and the new world. For even admitting the seeming analogies to which we have already excluded, these are a few numbered. Hold on for a second. I just want to make sure I didn't skip a page. Give me 1 second. To which we have alluded, these are so few in number and evidently too casual as not to invalidate the main position, and even should it be hereafter shown that the arts, sciences, and religion of America can be traced to an exotic source, I maintain that the organic characters of the people themselves, through all the endless ramifications of tribes and nations, prove them to belong to one and the same race, and that this race is distinct from all others. This idea may, at first view, seem incompatible with the history of man as recorded in the sacred writings. Such, however, is not the fact. Where others can see nothing but chance, we can perceive a wise and obvious design displayed in the original adaptation of the several races of men to those varied circumstances of climate and locality, which, while congenial to the one, are destructive to the other. The evidences of history and Egyptian monuments go to prove that these races were as distinctly stamped 3,500 years ago as they are now, and in fact, that they are covered with primitive dispersion of our species. All right, appendix. All right, number 1. On the 6th of July, 1841, I made the following communication to the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia, and now extract it from the proceedings of the society of that date. I submitted to the inspection of the members 8 adult skulls of the ancient Mexican race, for 6 of which I am indebted to Don J. Gomez de la Cutina, and for the other 2, Dr. John P. McCartney of City of Mexico. All these crania have been received since the publication of my Crania Americana. Do the skulls I suppose to be of the following nations? Number 1, the Tomies, 4 in number, which in the high vertex, flat occiput, great lateral diameter, and broad nose, characteristics of the American race. Okay, broad nose, characteristics of the American race. The Otomies preceded the Toltecs and were the least cultivated of the demi-civilized nations of Anahuac. The largest of these heads gives 92 cubic inches of internal capacity, and the smallest, that of the female, only 67. All right, and those are from the skulls that he excavated. All right. Number 2, the Kika Macon, a single skull of 83 cubic inches of internal capacity. This nation followed the Toltecas in the possession of Mexico in the 11th century of our era. They were nomads and hunters, but rapidly acquired the arts and civilizations of their predecessors. Number 3, the Lascalan, a single cranium. These people formed one of the 7 tribes who established themselves in Mexico during the Chichimecan monarchy and are renowned in history for their warlike exploits. They are well known to have rendered Cortes essential aid in taking the city of Mexico. This skull gives an internal capacity of 84 cubic inches, and like the others of this series, it is remarkable for its diameter between the parietal bones. It is worthy of remark that the average internal capacity of these 6 authentic Mexican skulls is precisely what I have accorded to these people in my Crania Americana. This 79 cubic inches. The mean of facial angle also accords with my previous measurements and gives 75%. All these heads were obtained from tumuli or mounds within the territories of the nations whose names they bear, so as to leave no doubt in my mind of the distinguished gentlemen from whom I received them, of their having pertained to individuals of those nations. The 2 remaining crania are supposed to be of those Aztecs who also belonged to the confederacy of the 7 tribes, but were the last to take possession. These were the people who subsequently obtained the supreme power and under the name of Aztecs or Mexicans governed the country at the epoch of the Spanish invasion AD 1521. The Aztecs were a brave and intelligent people, but remarkably for bloody rites, both in their warlike and religious observances. They were less cultivated than the Toltecas, but much more so than the surrounding barbarous tribes, and appear in fact to have been the connecting link between the 2. The largest of the heads gives 85 cubic inches of internal capacity, the smallest 77, the medium being 80 cubic inches. The configuration of these heads is on the same model as the preceding series, and the mean facial angle differs but a single degree. Whoever will be at the pains to compare this series of skulls with those from the barbarous tribes will, I think, agree that facts thus derived from organic characters corroborate the position I have long maintained, that all the American nations, excepting the polar tribes, are of one race and one species, but of 2 great families, which resemble each other in physical but differ in intellectual character. At a subsequent meeting of the Society, August 9, 1842, I exhibited the remains of a human skeleton from M.J.L. Stevens in a vault or a tomb at the ruins near Tikal, 19 leagues from Merida in the Yucatan. These bones have pertained to a female whose structure has not exceeded 5 feet 3 inches, at the same time that the absence of epiphysis and consequent consolidation of the bones are proofs of adult age. From the appearance of the teeth, however, which are fresh and not simply worn, a line of fury making of the crystal of the ilium, it is presumed that this individual had not passed her 20th year. The bones of the head, which are still partially separable at the statues, are admirably characteristic of the American race, as seen in the vertical occiput and great interperennial diameter, which measures 5 inches and 8/10. The head is full size in proportion to rest of the skeleton, and of which the bones are of very delicate proportions, especially of those the feet and hands. We're almost done. All right. An interesting feature of the skeleton is the occurrence of a large spongy nod on the upper and inner surface of the left tibia, on which it extends about 2 inches in length, an inch in breadth, and half an inch in thickness. Dr. Bridges, having subjected some fragments of these bones to the usual chemical test, found them in very great degree deprived of animal matter and additional evidence of their antiquity. We almost done. We almost done. We almost done. Remarks on the ancient Peruvians. In my work on the American skulls, the Crania Americana, I have expressed the opinion that the heads of the ancient Peruvians were naturally very much elongated, and that they differed in their respect from those of the Inca Peruvians and other surrounding nations. And having given this opinion at the meeting of the Academy prior to the publication of my work, I take the present occasion to renounce it. In the American Journal of Science for March 1840, I have already in a brief note adverted to this change of opinion, and I now repeat my matured conclusions in connection with positive facts derived from the work of distinguished traveler and naturalist M. Alcide Aubigny. This gentleman not only visited the elevated tableland of the Andes, which was once inhabited by the ancient Peruvians, but he remained a long time in the interesting region and has collected numerous facts in relation of the people themselves. Number one, the ancestors of the ancient Peruvians yet inhabit the land of their ancestors and bear the name of Aymaras, which was probably their primitive designation. Number two, the modern Aymaras resemble the surrounding Quechua or Peruvian nations in color, figure, features, expression, shape of the head, which they have ceased to mold into artificial forms, and in fact, in everything that relates to physical conformation and social customs. Their languages differ, but even here, there's a resemblance which proves a common origin. Number three, on examining the tombs of the ancient Aymaras in the environs of Lake Titicaca, Aubigny remarked that those which contain the compressed and elongated skulls contain also a greater number that were not flattened, whence he infers that the deformity of was not natural, but or characteristic of the nation, but the result of mechanical compression. Number four, it was also remarked that those skulls which were flattened were uniformly those of men, while the heads of the women always remained the natural shape. The squared or pteroidal form, which is the characteristics of the American race, especially of the Peruvians. Number five, the most elongated heads were found in the largest and finest tombs, showing that the deformity was mark of a distinction among these people. Number six, the researchers of Aubigny confirmed that the statements made at the distant intervals of time Pedro de Cesar, Galasiso de Vega, and Mr. Pentland have proved conclusively what I have never doubted, that these people were the architects of their own tombs and temples, and not, as some suppose, intruders who had usurped the civilization and appropriated the ingenuity of an incident and more intellectual race. Aubigny found temples of 100 to 200 meters in length, facing the east and ornamented with rows of angular columns, enormous gateways made of a single mass of rock and covered with bas reliefs, colossal statues of basalt, and large square tombs woolly above ground and in such numbers that they are compared to towns and villages. My published observations go to show that the internal capacity of the cranium and indicative of the size of the brain is nearly the same in the ancient and modern Peruvian vis, above about 76 cubic inches, a smallest of size, which is without a parallel among existing nations, excepting only the Hindus. Aubigny even supposed the ancient Peruvians to have been the lineage progenitors of the Inca family, a question which is not yet decided. Supposing this to be the fact, we may inquire how it happens by the Incas should it have abandoned the practice of distorting the cranium, especially as this among the Amaras was an aristocrat privilege. I was at first at a loss to imagine how this singular elongation of the head had been affected, for when pressure is applied to a flexural head, as the instance of the Chinooks and other tribes of Columbia River, the skull especially laterally in proportion as is dispersed above, whereas these people the head is narrow from the face to the occiput. It seems probable that this conformation was proposed by placing splints or compresses on each side of the head from the cheekbones to the parietal protuberances and another forehead, and conforming by rotary bandages. In this way, the face in the process of growth would be protruded in front and in the head elongated backwards, while the skull in all other directions could expand and comparatively little. These remarks will be more readily understood by references to the annex outlines, which are taken from the cast of one of the skulls obtained by Petlin. Got a few more pages. You're almost done. Dr. Goddard was suggested to me that the deformity observable in this series of crania might have been produced by the action of rotary bandages alone, without the use of splints or compresses. I admit the possibility of this result in some of the heads, but think that in others there is satisfactory evidence of the employment of the splint or compress, especially on the os frontis. I have, in my opinion, 6 casts of heads and 3 skulls of these people, all which present the peculiar elongated form in question. Remarks on the so-called pygmy race of the Valley of Mississippi. It had long been contended by intelligent persons who, however, were ignorant of anatomy, that the adjusted bones of these pretended pygmies never existed 4 feet and a half in length, and were often but 3 feet, notwithstanding the asserted indication of adult age. These statements made me desirous to investigate the subject by means of skeleton of one of these people, which I had at length obtained through the kindness of Dr. Trost of Nashville. Dr. McCall, an intelligent correspondent of Dr. Trost, having exhumed the remains from a pygmy cemetery near the Cumberland Mountain in White County, Tennessee. Open quote. The coffins, observes Dr. McCall in his letter addressed to me, are from 18 to 24 inches in length by 18 inches deep and 15 inches wide. They are made of 6 pieces of undressed sandstone or limestone, in which the bodies are placed with their shoulders and head elevated against the eastern end and the knees raised towards the face, so as to put the corpse in a reclined or sitting position. The right arm rested on an earthen spot of about 2 pints in capacity, without legs, but with lateral projections for being lifted. With these pots in some graves are found basins and trays also of pipe clay and comminuted shells mixed, and no one of these repositories is without cooking utensils. In one of the graves was found a complete skull and os femoris, but most of the other bones were broken in hastily removing them. This is said to be the largest skeleton ever found at any of these burying grounds. It has the cranium very flat and broad, with very projecting front teeth, and appears to have pertained to an individual not over 12 or 14 years of age. The bones which accompanied the letter indicate a very juvenile subject. For example, many of the dentaceous or first teeth yet remain in both jaws, while the other teeth of the permanent set have protruded are the first molars and the incisors, which as a very autonomous nose make their appearance at about 7 years of age. Of the other permanent teeth, some have no part formed but the crown, and all are completely within the maxillary bones. The presence of the new incisors, isolated from the cuspidity which have appeared, obviously gave rise to Dr. McCall remarks respecting the very projecting front teeth, but which, however, are perfectly natural in position and proportion. The cranial bones are thin and readily separable at statures, nor does the flat and broad configuration of the cranium differ from what is common in the Aboriginal American race. The long bones have their extremities separated by ellipsis, and every fact observed in this remains is strictly characteristic of early childhood or about the 8th year of life. Even the recumbent or sitting posture in which they are found has been observed in the dead bodies of the American nations from the Cape Horn to Canada, and the utensils found with them are the same in form and composition with those exhumed from the graves of the common Indians. These remains are to me an additional and convincing proof of what I have never doubted, that the so-called pygmies of the Western country were merely children who, for reason not readily explained, but which actuate some religious communities of our own time, were buried apart from the adult people of their tribe. So they were not actually pygmies, they were children. With respect to the Egyptians and Hindus as involved in the question, I can speak without reservation. Through the kindness of an accomplished gentleman and scholar, Judge R. Glidden, the United States Consul at Cairo, I have received 100 heads of Egyptian mummies from the tombs of Abydos, Thebes, and Memphis, and unhesitantly declare that with a few exceptions which have a mixed character and chiefly resemble the Coptic form, the confirmation throughout is that of the Caucasian race. The following extracts from my Cranium Egyptica, just now published, appear to me to be conclusive on this point. It was remarkable 50 years ago by the learned Professor Blumenbach that a principal requisite for an inquiry such as we now propose would be a very careful technical examination of the skulls of mummies hereto met with, together with an accurate comparison of the skulls with the monuments. This is precisely the design I have in view in the following memoir, which I therefore commence, by the analysis of the characters of all the crania now in my possession. These may be referred to two of the great races of men, the Caucasian and the Negro, although there is a remarkable disparity in the number of each. The Caucasian heads also vary so much among themselves as to present several different types of this race, which may perhaps be appropriately grouped under the following designations. Caucasian race, number one, the pelagic type. In this division, I place those heads with present the finest conformation as seen in the Caucasian nations of Western Asia and Middle and Southern Europe. The pelagic lineaments are family to us in the beautiful models of the Grecian art, which are remarkable for the volume of the head in comparison with that of the face, the large facial angle, and the symmetry and delicacy of those osteological structure. Number two, the Semitic type, as seen in the Hebrew communities, is marked by a comparatively receding forehead, long arched and very prominent nose, a marked distance between the eyes, a low, heavy, broad, and strong and often harsh development of the whole facial structure. Number four, the Egyptian form differs from the Palestic in having a narrower and more receding forehead, while the face being more prominent, the facial angle is consequently less. The nose is straight or aquiline, the face is angular, and the features often sharp and hair uniformly long, soft and curling. In this series of crania, I include many which the conformation is now appreciably different from that of the Arab and the Hindu, but I have not, as a rule, attempted to note these distinctions, although they are so marked as to have induced me in the early stage of the investigation, and for reasons which will appear in the sequel, to group them together with the proper Egyptian form under the provisional form of Austro-Egyptian crania. The Negro race. The true Negro confirmation requires no comment, but it is necessary to observe that a practiced eye readily detects a few heads with decidedly mixed characters, in which those of the Negro predominate. For these, I propose the name Negroid crania. For while the osteological development is more or less that of the Negro, the hair is long but sometimes harsh, thus indicating the combination of features which is familiar in the mulatto grades of the present day. It is proper, however, to remark in relation of whole series of crania that while the greater part is readily referable to some one of the above subdivisions, there remain a few examples in which the Caucasian traits predominate but are partially blended with those of the Negro, which last modify both the structure and the expression of the head and face. Following is a tabular view of the whole series of the crania, arranged in the first place according to their sepulchral localities, and in the second in reference to their national affirmities. So they're just showing the number of scores that he had, the type the different groups, and they're showing the sizes of them. All right, that's what they're showing here. All right, and then last but not least, classification of the human species. The following classification is a slight modification of that published in my Crania Americana. The races correspond with those in Professor Blumenbach's system, which latter differs but little from that of Buffon. The subdivision in families is based upon ethnographic analogies, both physical and physiological. The Caucasian race, A, the Japetic or Indo-European race. All right, and when we did, I think it was lesson 2 and 3, we identified that in those other books as well. Okay, so number 1, the Pelagic or Caucasian family, Germanic family, the Celtic family, the Indostanic family, and the Aboriginal, hold on for a second, and the Semitic or Syro-Arabian branch, the Arabian family, the Hebrew family, okay, and C, the Hamitic or the Egypto-Libyan branch, the Nilotic or Egyptian family, the Libyan family, the Mongolian race, the Mongol Tatar family, the Turkish family, the Chinese family, the Indo-Chinese family, the Polo family, the Malay race, the Malay family, the Polynesian family, the American race, the American family, the Toltecan family, the Negro family, the Negro race, the Negro family, the Kafirian family, the Austro-African or Hidentut family, the Oceanic Negro family, the Australian family. All right, and that's it, family. As you could see, with all this research dealing with the skulls and the bones and all this evidence, it is concluded that the American Aborigines is a family of their own family. The American two families, okay, that produced the entire Americans, but all similar. The American family and the Toltecan family, they are all related. So which brings me back to my point, okay? Since it is safe to conclude now that if we, again, looking at it from a biblical perspective, we could go back to that first creation, all right? That is, in my opinion, that was the creation of the American Aborigines. And that's why all the other races, they are linked together, okay? They have so many different similarities, but except of the American Aborigines, they're saying that they are a family of their own in their own world, okay? So I know that was a little bit lengthy for me because, like I said, I was up until 6:30. I got 2 hours rest, so that was a tough read for me, but we got through it. So I want to thank you guys for being a part of the build. The book is on the website. Please take your time and read it again, digest it. But once again, just giving as much evidence as possible and refuting, you know what I'm saying, or debunking all these theories or hypotheses, okay, that these Mongolians came through the Bering Strait. That was debunked, okay. That the Mongolians invaded South America in the 13th century. That was debunked, okay. So as you could see, all what we are dealing with right now, all this was planned. Why? Because they have made a strong effort, okay, to hide our true identity, okay. And for a very long time, they didn't know, they had no idea where we came from. So instead of just saying that, they had to create, there was a void, okay, of the people of this continent. Where did these people come from? Trust me, they have been studying our bones, our skulls, our DNA for a very, very, very long time. I promise you that. All right. And they know that we are different from all the other races of the world. So once again, there are only a few people that have the lawful and spiritual right to call themselves Americans, and that's the American Aborigine. That's why no matter where I go, I see people calling themselves Americans. I correct them. You are a United States citizen. There's a difference. All right. And that's why we have to step up. By all means, come together and restore our family. Okay. Yes, we had our grievances, as you could see. We fought each other. That's what families do. We did that. We still do it today. But I say we are at a juncture in our existence where we have to say, let bygones be bygones. And we have to come together, for those of us that are willing to come together. You feel me? Because it's the only way. All right. It's the only way. All right. So Tammy asks, are the Aborigines a part of well, the Eskimos is really part mixed with, you know, Mongolians, but can we consider them to be Aborigines? They always, because when they speak of the American Aborigines, they always add, and, you know what I'm saying, like there's a difference between the Eskimos and, you know, the American Aborigines. So I could say yes and no, you know, because, you know, they are closer to the you know, the Mongolians, all right, or some of the Asians. So I would probably say no in respect. All right. I would probably say no. Okay, so we've been on here for almost going on 3 hours now. So once again, that book is on the site. All right. And it wasn't just information, it was information that was provided from, and just so you know, all these research is literally in museums. Okay. I mean, I'm talking about skulls of our ancestors, all right? Bones of our ancestors that have been studied. So this is credible research. And as you could see, all the books on prehistoric America, we are being called Aborigines. All of them. Okay? So we have enough evidence, all right? Like I said before, okay? When we step up and we bring our claims, we are not going to, we have to put the burden of proof on the accusers. That's telling us we are not who we are. Let them prove that we are not. And I've always said that. Okay. So if we have to go and, whether we have to do a FOIA request or whether we have to subpoena museums, whatever the case we have to do, and start doing some tests to prove, okay, this is who we are, then it is what it is. It is what it is what it is. But there's no way, I'm telling you, that these people could continue to usurp our identity. We can't, we have to put a stop to that. All right. So that concludes this build. All right. So I'm about to end this. What I'm going to do next, not tonight, but when I have some time, I'm going to come back and do a video. And then we're going to start talking about just how we're going to start structuring, our organization, and asking people to reach out, for those that want to be a part of, the foundation of the organization. So we're going to put out a memo, a call to action, so we could start setting up our organization, so we could start making some moves. All right. Because it's time. It's time. Okay. So let me give you guys the website again, www.ipnan, let me put it in here, .org. All right. And please go to the site and feel free to support. All right. Cool. Let me go through and give a little highlight to those of you that was on the build. And family, I apologize, man. Like, I know I was, butchering a lot of, I've been, like I said, I was up all night, only got 2 hours rest today. So I'm still exhausted. So I'm gonna definitely shut it down early and get some rest. All right. So let us see what's up to Tammy, what's going on. We always like to give, when I can, always like to give everybody a shout out. All right. Malka, what's going on? Hope you're having a good day. Hope you're having a good day. All right. Jay Bander, sending much love and appreciation. Avia, much love and appreciation. Shanit, well, let's say Miss Hines. All right, because I want to make sure I get that correct. All right. Who else we have? What's going on, Brother Chris? What's going on? All right, we here, we in the building. We in the building. To Maria, much love. Chi Alpha, all right, blessings, family, blessings. All right. We have Arlene, Sister Arlene, what's going on? Much love. We have Zazie, sending much love and bliss. Thank you for tuning in. And of course, Brother Coy, Walker, and this is the website. All right. So I only highlight those that came up. All right. So if there's anybody else that I missed out, I apologize. I'm also thanking you and sending much love and appreciation. And of course, I said this earlier, but in closing, I'm going to say it again. I always say these affirmations. I say it every single day, and it's right in front of my computer. So I get to see it every day and say it every day. I am great. I am powerful. I am loved. I am physically wealthy. I am protected. Weapons formed against me will not prosper. I am a billionaire. I am wisdom. I am intelligence. I have the fountain of youth. My ancestors walk with me in righteousness. I am loving. I am compassionate. The universe provides all my needs. All right. So I just wanted to conclude that with that. And you go ahead and read that. And again, do your own conclusion. But I'll tell you this before I get out of here. Okay. None of them. And when I say none of them, I'm talking about none of this of these institutions. All right. We could bring that up for debate. All right. We could do a debate in front of the entire world because we have to call them out. Let's do it live on TV, like how they have the presidential elections. Let's have an open panel, okay? And let's bring us, and let's bring these natives, all right? And let's have an open, not debate, but a discussion, okay? And let them prove that we are not who we are. And let us bring our evidence, and let them bring theirs. All right, that's what needs to happen in front of the world. So like I said, when we step up, we got to step up. All right. So this is just the beginning. So y'all prepare yourselves, all right, to take your rightful seat at the table, because this is our home. We have always been here. In fact, we peopled the world, but they will not tell you that. Okay. Or at least our creation goes back before Adam and Eve. And if y'all think I'm just talking about this, I have videos I've done 2-3 years ago telling people I'm not a descendant of Adam and Eve. So how was I saying that 2-3 years ago in my videos? Because when you know, it's in your spirit. You feel me? When you know, because the truth is always within you. All right. And when I was taken in the state of rest, okay, I don't know, it seems like my ancestors was communicating with me, okay, in another language, but I couldn't understand it though. You know what I mean? I couldn't understand it, but I'm going to ask them to, to come back and, vibe with me again. I don't know what language that was, but it definitely wasn't English. But for some reason, in the state of whether it's a state of dream or whatever it wasn't a vision. So I would say in the state of dream, I understood them. You see what I'm saying? I understood them. So something is happening. All right. So I'm definitely, going to continue. What it is, Patty, much love. I appreciate you being here. All right. So I'm definitely going to call on them again and see, if they could give me a little help with understanding, that language, whatever they was talking to me in or whatever it was. But I got to figure it out. Okay. I got to figure it out. All right, lineage. We will talk later. If I don't do a live tomorrow, I am wishing you guys a great continuation. All right. I am not, and always remember, there are only 12 hours in a day. Okay. Use your hours wisely. It's only from sun up to sundown, from the rising to the resting of the sun. That is a day. It's even in the Bible. Okay. In Genesis, what we just read, from the rising of the sun to the resting or the setting of the sun is one day. Okay. Then night follows. So I'm saying this, utilize your 12 hours wisely. Don't spend the majority of your 12 hours that's in one day building other people when you have to build yourself. So take your time and build yourself. And I will never wish you a weekend, all right? Because we are not weak and life is continuing. So there is no end. Always remember that. Words have power, and the words that you speak becomes your reality. You're always casting spells. Okay, you're always casting spells. So when you acquiesce to having a weak end, that's exactly what you have. You make yourself weak, and you're calling an end to your existence. You're shortening your existence. You feel me? So always wish people blissful continuations, because life is ongoing. You feel me? I'm going to talk to y'all later.